Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cairngorm Coffee podcast. Today we are going to talk about the importance of equipment in the coffee shop. So how important is the quality of that equipment to serving a good coffee and generally trying to provide the customer with a good experience. So my expertise in this area is slightly limited, but lucky we have coffee maker extraordinaire, Robbie Lambie over there, who successfully set up Cairngorm Coffee, grew it from Frederick Street shop to this much bigger shop in Melville, knows a bit about making a coffee. So, Robbie, how important is the equipment
knows
in
a
the
bit
shop?
about buying rubbish equipment as well.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Obviously, it is the thing which makes you the money. Is very important. Probably the most important thing is something that doesn't break. So there's a real trend at the moment, or there has been for several years, in coffee equipment. Everyone wants to make the most glamorous, most high-tech looking and sounding and functioning machine. Problem with that is that, generally speaking, being innovative results in having to develop things for the first time, which then has risks attached.
Yeah, in terms of failure.
Yeah, so sometimes, well, from my experience, the more innovative you are, the more chance you've got of developing something that doesn't work properly.
Yeah.
Well, apart from obviously, these were fairly innovative, but they worked perfectly.
We can maybe get into that maybe in a bit more detail later, actually, the inner workings of a coffee machine.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might find that interesting, some people might not, but it is a relatively complicated machine. But I think first, let's start maybe with when you opened Frederick Street. So how did you decide what equipment to buy? Obviously, there's budget pressure. Are you trying to get the most for your money, or, are you just cheapest? What's cheapest?
Yeah, so to quickly summarize what an espresso machine is essentially a hot boiler, which forces water through the coffee puck, which is in the portafilter at pressure. And from that point, you can go fairly extreme, and you can add in, devices which pressure profile. So you can start with a low pressure, develop down to higher pressure as the shot continues. You can have something that our current machine in the West End here has, which is gravimetric function, which has scales integrated into the drip tray, and that will stop the shot when you get the amount of espresso you want dialed into it. So it can go quite far from being in its most simple form, something that makes coffee, to something which makes coffee conveniently, accurately, consistently. But to answer your question, we started off with something very simple to get to this stage, and that was an Electra Bar Lume. So it looked cool. That was what to me mattered. It didn't make the best coffee, and we switched it out fairly quickly for something else, which was, it looked even cooler and probably made coffee even less good, or less consistently, shall we say, which was a Fema E61, literally from the 60s. Yeah. So these first two machines were kind of pivotal in me learning how to make espressos. So the first one we got from a supplier, Matthew Algie, the first coffee supplier that we bought coffee from when we opened. And we decided quite quickly that we wanted to work with more local coffee roasters. They were Glasgow-based, but they were quite large. They were at a scale which probably didn't represent our true independent roots and what we wanted to be doing. So we switched to Mr. Ian down in Stockbridge. At that point, we had to give the machine back because we had it on a lease kind of basis on the proviso that you buy coffee from the roaster. Something that we are quite keen on detaching our business from now. However, that opened up the opportunity for me to have to try and buy another machine, having not spent any investment on a machine. We weren't able to sell it, in which case we still didn't have money to buy one. So I went onto eBay and bought this Fema, and it was based in London. I drove down with my mum. We picked it up from this guy's house. He had it in his kitchen.
Yeah.
This really old, amazing looking machine. I'll try and find a good picture of it. Some people might remember it. And it was great, but it was so simple that it was just a metal boiler. It hadn't changed since the 60s when it had been built, and it had levers that you just pulled on and off. And at this point, I was still trying to learn how to make espresso good.
Yeah.
And so this is quite a long-winded answer.
That's good.
I was very fortunate to be able to get some help from Paul, who owns Lowdown on George Street in Edinburgh, who is like a font of knowledge for espresso and coffee in Scotland.
Yeah.
He taught me so much, and he came in on his first day to kind of assist us, and was like, "What's your like system for making espresso?" And I was like, "I just turn the machine on, and then when it looks about right, I turn the machine off."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, okay." Obviously, I was like, "I don't know why I'm here."
Yeah.
He came in the next day with his own scales and was like, "This is what you should be doing."
Yeah.
And from there, it was like that kind of spark that made me completely change my view on what espresso shooting could be.
Yeah.
And kind of it was that made me realize that the current machine was not good enough to withstand the quality that I then wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
So that's when we started changing our mindset on what is a good machine and what is a good looking machine.
And I think you kind of you mentioned it briefly there, that the importance of consistency. And I think when you're in a high volume cafe like Melville is, where you're serving, hundreds of coffees a day, the importance is that it doesn't matter which staff member is using that machine and which customer it is, that they get the same experience every single time. So I guess that's what leads you on your next search, is what's the machine that can deliver that as comfortably as possible and look good.
And look good. Yeah, for sure. And, it's in part about making it easy for the barista to make good coffee and consistent coffee, because what you really want is for the barista to be engaging with the customer and concentrating on the things that matter, like service. And I think that's, our end goal was always, how can we just make sure everything tastes great? So there's a bit of work in the morning, making sure we set recipes. From that point on, we want to be able to press buttons and know we're getting good espresso out of the machine, which is easier said than done. So our next route was, we spoke to Lisa at Deer Green, and we, with her help, managed to buy a Marzocco Linea.
Yeah. And
so those people that know coffee will know exactly what a Linea is.
We're getting a tour around all the Scottish coffee names here.
I know. Well, it shows you how much we attribute our where we are now to so many people within Scotland. Being very fortunate, and in England. So that's and in Copenhagen.
But again, that's a strong coffee community in Scotland that's helped you,
definitely
learn and get started.
Definitely. I've in the last week probably mentioned 2 or 3 times how important it was for Cairngorm to learn from Steampunk and Good Coffee Cartel on how to roast, because learning to roast is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
You can't, people do try and learn to roast at home.
Yeah.
My ambition was always to roast for our cafes, and we were already at like a level that we needed quite a lot of volume, which meant we needed to buy a fairly decent sized roaster.
Yeah.
Which meant that I had to learn quite quickly
how to roast.
That's a whole other.
It's a different
topic.
podcast.
That's a different podcast. Yeah. So the Linea is essentially what your average coffee lover would say is a classic coffee machine.
Yeah, I know.
It looks like the espresso machine.
Yeah. Because
they've sold hundreds of thousands of them worldwide. Hugely successful.
Is that a good sign?
Very good. And I remember when we were buying it, the whole messaging was how they're a workhorse.
Yeah.
They just don't break. They keep on going. And that is so, that goes back to how important reliability is for machines.
Look a bit crap though, don't they?
So they look simple.
Yeah.
They're a box. But that kind of tells the story of what they are. It's like, it is a hot box that makes espresso. Yeah. But we were quite fortunate. We made a decision that we didn't want it to look the same as every other cafe in specialty cafe at the time. Yeah. Espresso machines have come on a long way, and there's a much more diverse range to choose from. There was a time when every specialty coffee shop in Scotland and the UK kind of hung their hat on the Linea.
Yeah.
And we're like, we don't want to be the same as another
Yeah.
cafe. So we enlisted the help of a local company called Hidden Stag.
Yeah.
We now make a lot of clothing. They're really cool. But the guy helped us to design a cover for the machine.
Actually,
So
I know exactly.
we did a whole enclosure that
Yeah.
fitted on top of the outer shell of the Linea, which had wood and it had our logo carved into it.
Yeah.
So that was a really cool project, and that was kind of the first step into us wanting to customize machines as well.
Yeah.
So we're quite fortunate. We've got like a yellow grinder, and we've got a peach coloured
Yeah.
coffee machine in West End, which actually isn't one of our brand colours anymore.
It's
Needs to get it rebranded.
But you'll notice Robbie has a thing for colours. He likes bright and bold colours, and that's, I think, that's been your whole vibe the whole time. Is like part of Cairngorm is having a good brand and having something that's memorable, and so that for you extends to the equipment you use. So obviously, I think what we've got in here now, some sort of eagle.
Black eagle, yeah.
Which is pink.
peach,
but
salmon.
it's a reliable piece of equipment, because I think we were talking, the podcast is about how important is the quality of the equipment to making a good coffee.
Yeah.
So as well as looking good, would you say that piece of equipment delivers, the quality of coffee that you want it to? I guess the answer is yes. But why?
I think we've developed into a buying behavior where we want to surround ourselves with beautiful spaces. Our money is precious.
Yeah.
And I think it's not enough just to deliver a good coffee now.
Yeah.
It's like people want to come in, they want to experience that coffee in a nice surrounding, and a lot of what the place looks like and what the machine you have says about the coffee you can expect is, it kind of delivers that before you part with cash. It's like, I find myself doing it rightly or wrongly. That, if I saw a Black Eagle machine like we have here in another cafe, I'd be like, oh, they all have good coffee.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that. It might just be that they've had a big investment.
Well, and that's what you're saying from a Linea point of view. Maybe you walk into a cafe with a Linea and it might not do good coffee.
No, quite often it doesn't anymore. And I think that is the issue probably with having that mindset. Yeah. Is that it is now easy to spend money and appear to be a specialty cafe. Yeah. And it's only one side of the story. It's like, how do you utilize that equipment? And there are home baristas who make incredible coffee at home with limited equipment. Yeah. Which is fascinating. That's another whole different topic. It's like, can you replicate the cafe environment with rubbish equipment? I know James Hoffman has done pretty cool YouTube videos on, can he get a cafe set up with £100 or whatever? Yeah. And the answer is like, yes, you pretty much can. Yeah. But for us, I just know we wouldn't put a bad looking machine or a machine that we know doesn't have credibility. Yeah. In the industry and in the kind of coffee audience into our shop. Yeah. Because it is an important part of the story. Yeah. So for us, it does tell the customer, okay, we really care about the quality of coffee because we've invested that amount of money in our equipment. Yeah. We're talking upwards of £15,000 in a good 3-group machine. Yeah. And that is a commitment in good quality coffee. Yeah. You then have to see through that commitment by making the coffee well and having good coffee to put into the grinders and all these things.
Well, and I guess we've not even touched on that to a certain extent, but obviously the quality of the grinding equipment that you've got in the cafe as well, that obviously has an impact as well. It's all, we talk about it's all about consistency. So making sure the grind is the same grind setting every day to go into the machines equally as important.
The biggest advice most people will give any cafe is the grinder is probably more important than the machine.
So why don't we talk about the grinder first then?
We can talk about it now. But I think it's less glamorous. Like, there's something about a really cool looking espresso machine.
Yeah.
There's no surprise or that we've put our machine in full view of the window of our shop.
Yeah.
We want the first thing people see when they enter our shop to be a really cool looking, great machine.
Yeah.
Because it straight away tells them a little bit about what they're about to experience.
Yeah.
And, we can maybe talk at some point about how experiential buying is the new thing. It's like it is important for people to get experiences as they part with cash and as they digest brands, I feel.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll feel that from your background with Treen. It's like, you want people to go on a journey almost as they buy from you.
100%.
That gives them much longer lasting and experience with you, but also they buy into what you're about.
Yeah.
It's about more than just a good coffee. It's like, what's the story along the way?
Yeah.
But the grinders, they are the thing that more often than not goes wrong. They're very temperamental. Making espresso is so challenging. It's such a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And a good grinder that doesn't fluctuate in temperature as you get busy, doesn't deviate too far from your dial-ups in the morning, that can make a huge difference between a successful shop and an unsuccessful shop.
Yeah.
And the big development now is more towards having scales built into your grinders, which can then deliver the right amount of coffee without additional faff of weighing things with scales. And I predict, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, you won't see a scale in a cafe again because you just won't need to. Yeah. And for, if we talk about how important the equipment is to tell the story of what you're about, for the last 5-10 years, scales have been the indicator that it is specialty. Or if it's not specialty. If I saw someone making coffee without scales, I'd be like, I think this is going to be very good coffee.
Yeah. But, for the majority of our customers, they probably aren't aware that, coffee making an espresso is a very precise art. And it's, it's probably another podcast topic around, the measurements that we use 18 grams of coffee, that equates to 36 grams of espresso. Mm-hmm. So you're basically adding in 18 grams of water into the espresso. So, it's a very precise science. It's
weirdly, I don't want to go into the science because I don't know about it, but it's actually, you don't put 36 mils of water through it and get 36 espresso.
You put 18 grams of water in.
No, you'd put like 52 grams or something. It's like, because, this is quite geeky, but like the puck of the of coffee that's in the portafilter absorbs
a lot of the
water. So you need to put it through more than you think.
Interesting.
And that's where...
That probably won't make the cut on this bit.
I was going to go in and explain volumetric dosing, but
I think that is probably another topic in itself. It is a scientific process to make an espresso. Mm-hmm. And people do it differently as well. I think we've talked that in Australia, for example, industry standard is 20 grams of coffee instead of 18.
Yeah.
So, it depends what coffee shop you go into. Might have a different process. Yeah. But I think if we come back to the machine... Like at the end of the day, that is the thing that is making sure your process is consistent 300 times a day, 500 times a day.
100%. Yeah. You basically want, and there is a debate in this about, as a barista, does it then take away your art of expression if all you're doing is pressing a button and you're getting great coffee out?
Yeah.
But I've talked a lot about how everybody can make good coffee now.
Yeah.
And that's why if we go back to our previous episode on marketing, it's like that's why marketing is so important, because you're now not differentiating yourself by the quality of coffee. But you got to find other ways to do that. So whether that's the way you tell your story, the way your packaging looks, the way you give service, and that's the whole thing. It's like by having a consistent machine, we free up the barista to be able to add that service level. People, they compare it to so what are they, sommeliers in wine. And the job then is like, okay, does the barista know, okay, this is a washed coffee called Kavote from Kirinyaga in Kenya, and it's got these tasting notes, and it's from the SL28 varietal, and that then is the art of the barista. So that's been talked about a lot the past few years, and I think it's not slowing down, this progression of equipment. we now have an automatic tamper, so we have no danger in the tamp being different, coffee to coffee, the pressure. We now have access to, but haven't taken the plunge in automatic milk dosers that give us the right amount of milk that we can then steam. We also have access to machines that can steam the milk for us and give us perfectly steamed microfoam milk for pouring flat whites. Then the job of the barista is basically make sure it tastes delicious in the morning, and then follow the recipe throughout the day, and make sure the customer has a great experience. And for me, the customer experience is, it's got to be delicious. They want to be in a nice environment, and they want to get their coffee quick. And all of these things kind of promote all of that. So we've kind of gone on a massive tangent there. But
it's an interesting thing. Again, it's an industry. I used to be a consultant, so it's like industry-wide, technology is almost to a certain extent having an impact on jobs. Like you're saying, milk steaming could come out. Do we need as many people behind the bar making coffees? Maybe not in the future. But I think part of specialty coffee has been built upon the fact that you have a barista behind the bar who has an element of skill, and I think that skill to the customer is communicated via the latte art probably. That's the one area where you're like, someone who seriously knows what they're doing has made this coffee. For a consumer, that's probably the only thing that you're like, the machine doesn't matter, the steamer doesn't matter, the grinder doesn't matter. That latte art looks incredible. Barista must be good at his job.
100%.
Or her job.
Which is funny. And that just kind of goes full circle to tell you, the customer, they're buying with their eyes. So they're seeing a great machine. They're thinking this coffee is going to be great. They're seeing great latte art. They're thinking this is going to taste delicious. And, I've made myself terrible coffees that look fantastic. But it probably would have tasted worse if the latte art was rubbish.
100%.
Which is weird. Like it can persuade you a certain way. It's like, going again on different tangents, we talk about how tasting notes really change your ability to perceive how good a coffee is.
Another podcast.
So you're cupping coffee, you're tasting coffee, and you're thinking, what does this taste like? Someone says, that tastes like blueberry candy. All of a sudden, it's all you can taste. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, your coffee might not look or taste great, but you walk in, you see a great grinder, a great machine. It can kind of go some way to persuade you to A, part with cash, and B, probably think the coffee you're tasting is better than it is.
So if we want to kind of summarize what we've been discussing here for, I guess, some of our customers who are not coffee experts or maybe not involved in the coffee industry, but we're basically saying when you do go into a coffee shop, have a quick look at the machine, have a look over the counter at the grinder, and you maybe might not know what looks good and what isn't, but generally, good looking equipment means the coffee is going to taste better.
I think it means that at some level in the chain, they have cared enough to invest in the quality of coffee. So it happens, but it's rarer that someone would spend £15,000 and then use rubbish coffee. And it does happen, as I say. Reiterate that. It does happen. But it happens less likely. It is a fairly good indicator. And I think ask your barista if they enjoy their machine. I think you'll have some interesting conversations. I think you'll find that baristas, shop owners, they're extremely passionate about the equipment they use, and it can start some pretty interesting debates about coffee. I'm going to shoehorn in a quick shout out to James at Us v Them there as well, because it's very important to have someone who can maintain your coffee machine. I think Robbie has to do a lot of that himself, but if we need an expert to come and fix a coffee machine, it's James from Us v Them, and that is an incredibly important job to have, someone who can support you in that way, because the coffee machine is the business, basically. So if you don't have that, business is done. And let's face it, hardly any cafes can afford to have a spare espresso machine in their garage. So that goes down. You're closing the doors. Which is tough.
So
Another shout out probably for the machine supplier producer that we represent, which is Victoria Arduino,
yeah,
amongst others. But we, if you come to our shop in the West End, that is the machine we're using, the Black Eagle by Victoria Arduino. So we have a lot of fun with them and Camilla, who represents them, and wholly stand by the quality of what they make.
well, we certainly do. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of the Care and Gorham Coffee Podcast, and we will look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.
Bye.